I'm Stargate Pioneer.
I'm Haley.
And I'm Lauren from Legends of S.H.I.E.L.D.,
a podcast member of the Gonna Geek Network, just like the one you're listening to now.
The opinions expressed are those of each individual. Check out all the other podcasts
at GonnaGeekNetwork.com and get ready because geekiness begins in 3,
2,
1.
Welcome to Better Podcasting, a show where we talk about podcast tips, tools, and best practices to help you succeed with your podcast. What makes us different? Well, just like you, we podcast purely out of the love and fun of it. Podcasting is our hobby, and we recognize that it's yours too. We always encourage your questions and feedback, and you can find all of our contact information at betterpodcasting.com. Here's your host for the show, Stephen Jondrew and Stargate Pioneer.
Hello and welcome to episode 35 of Better Podcasting. My name is Stephen Jondrew, and with me today is the infamous Stargate Pioneer.
I'm infamous and I'm ready to roll. Sometime we're going to have to change it up for our fans, and I will start the welcome to Better Podcasting, but...
Whoa, sorry to cut you off here. I actually misread it. It said the unfamous Stargate Pioneer. My apologies. I totally misread that.
Unfamous, infamous, notorious, whatever. That's me. And by the way, happy 4th of July. Happy Canada Day. We hope you are out safe and celebrating summer's finest in North America. And if you're anywhere else in the world, we know you celebrate the 4th of July too. Why? That is because podcasting started in America, and America started on the 4th of July, and we are ready to roll with podcasting.
Yeah, I'm still stuck to my Commonwealth mother.
All you have to do is have a vote and you're good to go.
So how's your week going so far, Mr. Pioneer?
It's awesome. I'm glad to be on vacation, just finished up some travel, and I'm looking forward to some R&R. And that is cool because as podcasters, we talked about it before, you need to recharge. So unplug for a little bit, get out there and enjoy life. Life is happening around you, whether you realize it or not. So yeah, while it's great to have a hobby or a business podcasting, experience some life, smell the flowers, and have some fun.
Absolutely. And especially in the summer, because next thing you know, the winter's around and you're just like, oh, what am I going to do? I guess I'll just have to start another 4 podcasts. And then...
No. Two, only do 2. SP's advice, only do 2 podcasts. SP will always be known for, yes, have multiple podcasts, but only do 2. 2. That's all you get is 2.
What is it? Do as I say, not as I do. Isn't that's the Stargate Pioneer philosophy?
Right. As soon as I could dump some podcasts, I will. I know eventually Arrow will go off the air, and while Starlight Tribune has been fun, I'm not sure it will morph into something else. We'll see. I'm having a ton of fun with Neil and Chris and the guests we have on, so it'll be sad to see that go, just like it was sad to see Voices of Defiance go. And I know, Stephen, you've said farewell to a couple podcasts too, and while it's heartbreaking, at the same time, it allows you to do either different or bigger or better things, one of the two, and you can have a lot of fun doing that.
For sure. And that segues perfectly here. Yes, Stargate Pioneer does do a ton of podcasts, and all of which are on the Gonna Geek Network, available at GonnaGeekNetwork.com. And also on the Gonna Geek Network is a show called Game Life Balance US. And in episode 22, titled Mighty Number 9 Launch, Kickstarter Fails, and Booking Air Travel, John and Cody discuss the epic tale of the Mighty Number 9 video game launch, plus other bests and worsts of Kickstarter games. So check all of that out in episode number 22 of Game Life Balance US at GonnaGeekNetwork.com. You know what? I sometimes like to do specialty episodes, especially in the summer when you're heading on vacation and doing all sorts of crazy getaways away from your computer. Don't you, SB?
Yeah, I do. You're going to have to do one or some along the way. You don't have to, but it does help. It helps your flow of your podcast. It helps to change things up a little bit, and it helps bring a special element to your podcast. And there's a lot of different specialty elements or episodes that you can actually do, none of which, or not all of which, have to be vacation oriented. They could be oriented towards a special anniversary on your podcast, milestone episodes. It can be a ton of different stuff. And so we thought that since we were approaching one anyway, we're going to take some time and we're going to talk about different specialty episodes and what you can do with your podcast. So, Stephen, what do we got on tap for the folks today?
Well, I think I have some Coors and some Bud. Oh, wait, sorry. Not that type of tap.
You don't have any America? Come on, man. It's 4th of July. You got to have some America beer.
No, today we're going to actually start off by telling you a little bit about some of the types of specialty shows that you might want to broach. And we'll start off with the infamous clip show that we spoke about last week. The clip show is a semi-filler. The reason why I say semi-filler is because obviously it's not requiring you to sit down and podcast for an hour. But on the other hand, my opinion, clip shows actually will take longer for you to produce than an actual full show, because you have to go dig up the source material, put it together in a manner that flows, and do a bunch of other things like that. So, I think it takes a bit longer, but it's great if you're in a situation where one of your hosts can't podcast, or you just want to go ahead. And again, why I say semi-filler is if you want to go recap the past. Right now, we have 35 episodes as of this episode of Better Podcasting. There are people who I know have not listened to the beginning episodes because they jumped on part way. So it's a great way to entice people to go and check some of your back catalog.
It is. I've done clip episodes before, as I mentioned last episode with Voices of Defiance. It is a ton of work. It really was. But we hadn't podcasted in like a month or so, so I had some time to put together a filler episode. And clip shows are great just to have on hand for a variety of different reasons. Sometimes when you're submitting for coverage at a convention or some sort of event or whatever, people like to say, hey, I need a sample of your work. So it's great to have that on hand anyway. So if you take little chunks out of your episodes and you put them aside, as you should be doing all along, and you didn't have to do this, but it is beneficial if you do, then putting a clip show together when you're sick, when you're in the hospital, when you have massive power outage or something like that, or you have technical issues like we did a couple of weeks ago on the Gonna Geek show, you can say, all right, we surrender, we can't record this week, but we're going to give you some content anyway. And for your average listener, for your normal listener, if you put in good clips and they go, oh yeah, this is great, this is why I remember, and this is why I like listening to the show, and I remember this and I remember that. For your new listener, they can go and say, oh wow, they discussed this, they discussed that, because podcasting has been around for 12 years. Some shows have been around for 12 years. I guarantee you, I am not going to go back to episode 1 of those podcasts. So if I'm a few years into a podcast and I just start picking it up, then I can go back and I can listen to whatever content they're trying to showcase and then go forth on that. I know some shows use them for anniversary or milestone shows as well, but clip shows, they're good to have on hand. They're good to be constantly in production with. And I know you've got a ton of other things on your plate, but a clip show is very useful for a variety of different things, like I said before. And yeah, Stephen, if our podcast was ever picked up, any of our podcasts were ever picked up for an award, I guarantee you they'll want a 5-minute segment or stuff like that. Like I've actually held a Parsec award in my hand on a podcast. And in order to get that podcast Parsec award, Stephen just showed up one of the GonnaGeek.com show awards that we gave away in Gonna Geek 150. Anyway, for a Parsec award, you actually have to submit somewhere between 5 and 15 minutes. It depends year to year, show to show, category to category of material. So having that information on hand already is a big step up on your competition of giving you a chance to actually receive the award.
I'm going to give our Better Podcasting listeners a little inside information on me. I will go on record and say right now that if somebody submitted a podcast to the Gonna Geek network, they would get an instant plus in my books if they submitted it with a link to a clip show that summarizes their show. Now, at full disclosure, I'm absolutely going to go back and do my usual process where I listen to your most recent episodes to see where you're standing now, but you're going to get a check mark for me if you were to send me a clip show in your application, because I think that just, if you can show your history in a short episode, I will take the time to listen before I evaluate basically listen to and evaluate where you are for network admission. So
that's right. And clip shows can be anything from just a couple of minutes to a regular episode length, or if you have a little bit more material, you can even go beyond that and whatever. But just be conscious of the fact that some listeners, I don't know what the percentage is, but some listeners have a set amount of time to listen to your episode. So if you go beyond that in any episode, they'll just cut you off and move on to the next one. I mean, people have a limited amount of time, and that is that. But some listeners that really adore your content, I mean, if you're giving valuable content to your listeners, or funny or entertaining or whatever it is, they're going to listen to the whole thing eventually. It's just going to take them a little bit longer. So just keep that in mind while you're making your clip show. Now, while you're making your clip show, I would recommend something that's not too short, not too long. Like, you don't want a 10-minute clip, 10-minute clip. Those are segments. So you're talking something between 30 seconds, and that's maybe too short. So maybe 45 seconds and a few minutes, maybe 5 minutes maximum for a clip. In 5 minutes is if you're really going over some heavy information that you have to, or really funny information that takes a long time to go through. So that is it. You're not trying to give your whole show. You're just trying to give the highlight information and entice them to go back and listen to other episodes, or just remind them of past information.
For sure. Another type of specialty show that you might have, and this is something where a lot of times it will fit into your regular show, but it might actually also be something that you want to spend a little bit more time on. It's an interview show. I'll give you a great example of that. Recently, Stargate Pioneer on his Legends of S.H.I.E.L.D. program did go, and he got a bunch of clips that fit really well with that show. They were interviews that Laura and his co-host managed to get at Comic Palooza, but not really time to put them all into a regular main episode of Legends of S.H.I.E.L.D. So he broke them out into some specialty episodes, and they worked terrific, and it gave them the time that they needed to properly flow, to give the proper credit to the interviewee, and it just worked really well, SB.
Thank you very much. Another thing to keep in consideration for specialty episodes, you don't want to dump like 50 on them on your audience at once. Even if you're starting a brand new podcast, I've seen this on the forums lately. People are saying, oh, I got to have 6 episodes in the can, or I have to have 15 episodes in the can, or I need 30 episodes. Okay, so that advice is given a little out of context. So some people advise giving or making sure you have 20 to 30 to 50 topics on hand, sometimes content actually produced, so that you don't get stuck in a cycle where you can't get an episode out on a given week because you're just in the mode of, I have to produce it. Because sometimes when you're starting out, production takes a lot longer. So a weekly cycle, a bi-weekly cycle, a monthly cycle, depending on how much time you have on hand, you just can't do. So that is why that advice is given, to make sure that you can constantly have content available. It is not given to flood the content out there to your new listener, because if somebody subscribes to your show, they're just going to get the latest episode unless they're really interested, and they will download all the episodes. And I will give you a personal example. When I started Legends of S.H.I.E.L.D. Long Box Edition, that was based off of segments that were already in Legends of S.H.I.E.L.D. So I had 20 episodes already just from the get-go. Now, I didn't do this intentionally. It was just how it happened. Is when I started that podcast, I'm like, okay, great, I'm just going to get all this information out there. So I had, like, day 2, I had 17 episodes that were out there. I wasn't expecting anybody to go get them or anything. They were just in the feed. They were there. And if somebody wanted them, they could hear them, but they had already been released as part of Legends of S.H.I.E.L.D. What I noticed iTunes do, they only showed 1 new episode a day. So I had to go 3 weeks before all my content was on the search on iTunes available. And it was the same on mobile. It was the same actually on the iTunes desktop as well. So some people throttle you as how many new episodes you can get out there. And then if you have multiple episodes to get out there as well, is that people aren't just going to download 5 in one day. So 1 a day, if you have a batch of episodes, that's probably the maximum that I would recommend. But that is multiple episodes out at one time. The interview show itself was very simple. We wanted to highlight that one interviewee, and we were able to do that and get those episodes. We did 4 episodes. We got a few more in the can that we got to get out. I got to get together with Lauren and record, but with our schedules, it's been taxing to get together and do that. But we highlighted those individuals, and those individuals were able to promote that episode. All of the interviewees that we did actually ended up promoting the episode some multiple times. So that was really good to see.
For sure. And that actually leads perfectly to my other point that I had about interviews. It can definitely be a promotional advantage if you do have a single episode dedicated to a single interviewer, because that interviewer is more likely to promote it if it is just all about them, as opposed to if it's an interview within a bunch of other podcasts. That person might want to listen to the rest of it. And if they disagree with something that you say, they might feel a little less inclined to tell their following about the show, as opposed to knowing that this is one episode that is all about me. And I can go, hey, look, check it out. It's me. So definitely has an advantage to doing it on its own. Another thing, we've actually done it. Shocking. I don't know where. Maybe the better podcasting feed is panels. If you are somewhere, and this could be a panel like what we did, where it was about podcasting, it could be a panel about a workshop or something like that. It could be a variety of different ways. Those can also be great specialty episodes if it fits with your niche, because reason we say it's a specialty episode is because it's going to break your format. Usually it's going to be a little different than you usually do. And if you preface it and you do keep the audience engage with it and tell them why you're doing it, it can fit into your feed nicely, some audio that you already have. And plus, hey, it gives you a little bit extra R&R that week, right? Because you're going to take it and put it together, but you're not sitting back in front of the microphone for 60 minutes. So definitely, if you've got that audio, you can probably make a specialty episode out of it.
Yep. And another specialty episode that we have accomplished on multiple podcasts is Christmas or holiday episodes. As Stephen alluded to at the beginning of the show, these specialty episodes, like clip shows, like holiday shows, like award shows, whatever, they're actually going to be, since they're outside of your normal format, they're going to be extra preparation time. And even though you're pre-recording, you're actually jamming. Say you're going to be off for 2 weeks, or you're pre-recording 2 weeks, you're actually jamming 4 weeks worth of work into like 1 week. So just keep in mind that if you want to do this sort of thing, you're going to have to up your game and prepare a long time before that in order to actually get the product, because the actual recording and sometimes the production is pretty easy on some of these break your format, because they're just fun. You're just goofing around or whatever, or maybe you're giving valuable content for that specific season or reason. And it could go both ways. But the main point is that holiday or special episodes break you out of your normal format. You just have a good time with relaxing or getting a special message out or whatever. And then you can move on with your regular format in the new year, or coming back from a summer vacation or whatever, like we're about to do here on Better Podcasting.
Absolutely. And on the note of the Christmas and holiday episodes, I want to give a little bit of an example that I've got about it. This past year for the GonnaGeek.com podcast, we actually have a recurring, what we call a game that we do from time to time, and it's called Know Your Geek. And usually what it is if we have a new guest come onto the show, we get them to provide a variety of feedback about themselves in sort of a quiz format, and then we go around and we try to guess it. And it's a lot of fun for the listener. We get a lot of great comments about it. It's also fun for us because we're getting to know the guest and also welcoming the guest, letting them tell a little bit about their backstory. Well, what we did on the GonnaGeek.com main podcast this past Christmas is I did a Know Your Gonna Geek. I went, and getting back to that prep work that SP talked about the weeks leading up, I emailed and canvassed a bunch of the Gonna Geek hosts, and I opened it up to pretty much everybody to try to put together some facts, and people had to guess who the fact belonged to. So it was a way of taking our existing format, or an element, I should say, that the audience and the listener base was familiar with, and putting it into a shorter, festive episode. We did a bunch of Christmas stuff. We did a little Christmas hat gag. I had some lights behind me. Just made it a really festive time. So it was a way of doing a specialty episode. We were able to do this in advance, which then bought us that gap around Christmas that we wanted. It kept it festive because, let's be honest, a lot of your audience is probably going to be in the festive mood that time of year. And we ended up putting together a specialty episode that still had a familiar element. So something like that can work really well for these sort of Christmas / holiday / whatever shows. If I had a show that was a bunch of American co-hosts, I would totally be tempted to do a July 4th specialty episode. And by that, I do mean with aliens invading and coming, because that's July 4th, right? That's Independence Day down there, isn't it?
That is. It's a resurgence of Independence Day. Absolutely. So, yeah, 1996 was a very good year. And, you know, it's funny, Stephen, somebody had the audacity to put together an article of the 6 movies that should have been redone from 1996 above Independence Day. And I took a look at that list going, nope, Independence Day is still up there, guys. You missed the mark. So there you go. But yes, having a holiday sort of based event, like, okay, so not only holiday event, but like a new Star Wars movie, the first new Star Wars movie in like 20 years or whatever it was, 12 years, whatever. That's an event. And yes, you're going to do special podcasts for that outside your normal format, because unless you're doing Clone Wars or what's the new one called? Rogue? It's not Rogue. The new Star Wars series. Unless you're doing one of those on a weekly basis, which is only a season or whatever, you're doing Star Wars content outside the box. And then when those big events, those Super Bowls, those movies actually come out, which are going to be more frequent now, it's still a big event. So that's definitely an event to keep in mind. And talking about big events, if you happen to get together with your co-host somewhere or somebody else that is a podcaster or that you want to talk about or you think would be great to have on your show, yeah, do an in-person meetup podcast. That is definitely the case. We did it on Gonna Geek earlier this year as part of the C2E2 panel. We talked about it before. Cody marched us down to WGN. We did an actual roundtable podcast in the WGN radio studio. That will always be a highlight of my podcasting career. So thank you very much, Cody, for doing that. And it was a hilarious, just fun to actually participate and listen in afterwards episode. So you can do that. It will break your format. So people are going to be like, who is this guy? Who else is talking on this? So we actually thought, well, which podcast should we actually allow to release this episode on? Because it doesn't really fit any format. It was just us BSing. So that's a consideration as well. Does it fit your format? Mm-hmm. And if not, then put a special header footer on it and just denote to your listener that, hey, this was just something cool that I did and we thought you'd like it. So we'll move on from there.
And I gotta say, like, if SP and I ever got together, we would, I like to think that we're the type of people where we would still have the fairly usual better podcasting format, but it would have a totally different feel if we were to record person to person, primarily because we'd just be throwing things at each other the entire time. I just know that's what would happen.
I want to use the Rusto mic.
I've got that around here now somewhere. I let my son play with it, and this is a callback, by the way, to when we talked about our evolution of gear. I actually have a crap generic microphone that has a rusted grill. Well, I've let my son play with it now, and it's all dented, so it's getting even better.
You let your son get lead poisoning from a rusted grill microphone? What a bad parent you are.
Don't call people on me. I thought you were going to go with the fact, though, that I'm a bad parent because I'm getting my son enticed in podcasting. So there you go.
You'd have to compete with Rob Walsh and a bunch of other people that are way up higher on the podcasting industry than you on that.
Absolutely. Here's another great example of a specialty episode. SP did touch on it earlier, but the milestone episode, talking about your hundreds, your half hundreds, like your 50s, things like that. You know, we talked about it a couple weeks ago. We did a specialty joking around segment for the 150th episode of the GuineaGeek.com podcast. When we did our 100th episode, it was actually the debut on the GuineaGeek.com podcast of our video. So really taking that opportunity to celebrate your milestone and celebrate it with your audience. Include them and don't be shy of it. You know, you got to be careful. Sometimes they can be received poorly depending on how you do, but that's how you learn. But I absolutely encourage you to try something special on your milestone, because they only come around every 50 to 100 episodes depending on which milestone you want to embark on. Of course, there is your year anniversary as well, if you want to do that, where you actually celebrate the 1 year mark. But I personally prefer to stick with the numbers because they're a little bit easier to follow.
Right. Now, I was with a podcast that did, I can't remember if it was 300 episodes or 5th year anniversary. It was a special, like 3.5 hour long episode. And the producer brought a lot of the key audience members, community members in throughout the course of that 3.5 years. So that was pretty cool. And then just last year, I was part of the Legends 5th year anniversary podcast on July 30th, 2015. You can go look that up. What's really important about this is that we had a special outtake on that episode that I actually tried to get the guys to record their Gonna Geek pre-rolls, and it was just hilarious, and it took a while, and the guys were just revved up on that. And Sean and I, who are not regular parts of the Legends crew anymore or ever, from in my particular case, we came back into that show per Wing's request, and it was just the 5 of us, and it was, or 6 of us or whatever, and it was just hilarious. It was fun.
I was there. I was there for a brief time.
Yeah, so it was fun. And Wing, again, congratulations for that. 5 years on a podcast is fantastic, and that is still ongoing today.
Absolutely. Now, here's another idea that we've got here, which is, it's actually sort of our last point that we have, which is a variety of different ideas. It's special announcements / event driven ideas. Starting off, we touched on it last week, was charity events. These are really good specialty episodes, in my opinion, to have. Every year we've got that, we mentioned it last time, the CCL for Kids charity that former co-host of mine, Steve Boyd, does. And I always make sure to take one episode to basically dedicate the majority of the segment or of the podcast to talking about it, because I feel like it gives it its best exposure, is really highlighting it. You know, I do combine it with some of the other usual elements that we have on the GonnaGeek.com podcast, but it's a really great example of how you can highlight something that is near and dear to you in one of your podcasts.
Yeah, and it doesn't necessarily have to be charity stuff, although kudos to anybody that is integrating charity into your podcast. You should, at some point in time throughout the year, do some sort of charity or charitable like event in your podcast to give back to the community, to give back to mankind. Basically, if you're doing something for people and if they're doing something for you by listening to your podcast, you definitely have some influence that you can give on these people, and at least make the opportunity available for people to give back. That is awesome. But also, we talked about it last time, International Podcast Day, September 30th. There's an example of a special event that is driven for one specific day that you can take part of and record an episode, either to release or record it live on that specific day. You can do a specific contest giveaway episode of, hey, look, you know, we're giving away this brand new car, and just lead up to it like a big thing. And that would, in my opinion, usually be in conjunction with some sort of charitable event if you're giving away something big.
Let's just clarify, like this podcast is not giving away a car. Let's make sure that that's very clear.
Well, we could give away like a Hot Wheels, like a podcasting mobile. I think that would be awesome.
I like it.
Yeah, and nowadays you can 3D print anything, so we could do that too. Or say you're introducing a new show or a spin-off show, like if Steven and I, we could have gone on Gonna Geek and announced this show on a specialty episode. We kind of did on a little segment, but you could take over a whole show to do that. I could have done it with Legends of S.H.I.E.L.D. and say, hey, look, you know, our next episode, check this out, is going to be Legends of S.H.I.E.L.D. Long Box Edition, and then played the first episode of Long Box Edition within the confines of a Legends of S.H.I.E.L.D. special edition, and then move on with that. And then the award shows, they come around once a year or once every so often. I know Steven kind of combined the milestone with the award show on Gonna Geek, but podcast awards happen. The Parsec Awards happen. The Podcasters Hall of Fame happens once a year, and those could be special episodes. If you have a podcast about podcasting or a podcast about whatever subject it is, like the NFL Hall of Fame, that could be a special episode on somebody's podcast. So that would be cool as well. So you're talking anything from just simple network-ish or podcast-centric awards, all the way up to some big events, like I said, the NFL Hall of Fame, Grammys, Emmys, something like that, or the annual podcast awards. And then the last thing, special event or event driven, something like Nerd Alert News. Now, I know Chris and I have been trying to get together to live stream and comment on like a SpaceX launch or something like that. And that would be an example of something like that, or something big happens, some big, huge news drops and Chris needs to get out a special episode. So that's kind of part of the format of the show, but that's just an example of some things that you could do that is event driven within your podcast.
For sure. And this leads perfectly to another great example, which is on Nerd Alert News, which if you're not familiar with it, Chris Farrell, who we've had on the show before, he puts out multiple episodes a week of the latest nerd happenings. It is on the Gonna Geek Network at GonnaGeekNetwork.com. And what he does is when something big comes out, he usually, because it's a solo podcast he usually brings in people to talk about it in a sort of round table format. For example, there was that Star Wars trailer that hit, the Rogue One trailer for the movie that comes out next year. He got a few people together and they talked about the trailer and he dedicated the episode to it. It's a great example of how you can do a specialty episode that covers a subject that you usually would anyways, and also has that familiar element that your audience is used to. So I again encourage you, if you are doing a solo show and you're looking for some specialty ideas, check out Nerd Alert News. He does a really good job with that and finding that balance. So it's a good example and a good reference material.
Yep. I got to have my hat off to Chris. Other than actually being a West Virginia supporter, Mountaineer supporter, you're a great guy, great podcaster, and I'm proud to be associated with you, even though you have that West Virginia stink on you.
I'm from Canada. I don't know what these guys are talking about. So let's just wrap this all up with a couple general pieces of advice for your specialty episodes. Number one, when you do a specialty episode, define your purpose of it. And the reason why I'm telling you to define your purpose of it is to make sure that you are doing it for a reason. Don't just be like, you know what, it's time to do a specialty episode. Figure out what is the reason. Maybe you have that back catalog of interviews and you're like, we got to get these out. Maybe it is a matter of, we cannot podcast. We cannot find a way to bend our schedule and actually record a podcast 2 weeks from now, 4 weeks from now. But we want to make sure that we do have some content, some reference material for the listener/audience. So that is something that make sure you define your reason so you're not just doing it for the sake of doing it.
Yeah, and then always be upfront with your audience and say, hey, look, this is what we're doing this week. If you want to check out a regularly scheduled episode, go one back or one up, or in my case with Legends of S.H.I.E.L.D., since we had to drop 4 of them last week, one back or like 3 or 4 up, and you can catch our regularly scheduled content. Well, at the beginning of all of them, I say we're normally a show about the ABC television show Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. and in the general Marvel comic universe, set that up front because the interviews were slightly out of scope, but we were covering the con, so we had to do them. So it worked. It was great. And just be upfront with your audience. Tell them what the expectations for the specific episode and for your show normally is.
The other thing that I want to recommend you do is try to keep an element of your usual format. A great way to do this is to just do your standard beginning and end cap. If you have a way that you usually open your show and end your show, try to do that the same. Now, with that said, sometimes specialty episodes actually specifically will get you away from those things, but try to keep that element in there somewhere. Maybe you use similar transition music if that's what you do in the middle, but try to keep an element that is familiar there. And the reason why I recommend that is because it helps your existing fan base feel still in touch with the show, but also somebody new that might stumble into that episode. You will be warning them that it is a specialty episode, but they also do get a little bit of a taste of what your podcast usually is like. So try to keep that element in there. The other thing kind of along the same line is try to scatter your specialty episodes. Don't put them all together. And SP did touch on this earlier. But again, you don't want to misrepresent your brand.
Right. And I want to give another great example that's also on our network, the GonnaGeek.com network, is Gallifrey Public Radio. It's a podcast about Doctor Who. They go to conventions throughout the year and just have an amazing time. Kier and Haley and Jay just do a great job covering the Doctor Who verse and the specific events at conventions, while still Doctor Who centric, are out of their normal scope of their normal format. So they do a great job of interspersing the interviews, the panels, and whatever throughout their podcast. Right now, they're kind of on a hiatus because the BBC decided not to give any new episodes of Doctor Who for a year. Dang them. Dang them. It's like HBO with Sopranos all over again. So they go back and they're going through back content. And they just about a month ago, they released an interview from last year that they still had on tap. But so spread that stuff out. You never know when you're going to need a filler episode. You never know. If it's timeless content, just keep it ready to go. You don't have to all release it within the same week. Now, you can, but if you intersperse it out, then your regular scheduled listeners will be able to get that, like he said. Now, another thing that I'd like to go over is length. Now, we touched on this before, but you can go shorter than usual because you're outside your normal format anyway. You can go longer because you're outside your normal format. Now, is that going to, sit well with your audience? Yeah, normally it will. I mean, some content is better than no content at all if you're shorter, and if you're longer, well, if it's good content, they'll keep listening. So just keep that in mind. And that goes for any episode, but specifically for specialty episodes, since you're outside your format anyway, that is something to keep in mind. Now, let's talk about bonus content, Mr. Steven.
Ooh, well, bonus content. The reason why we like to classify this a little bit differently is it's something that ends up getting both of your regular crowd and your specialty crowd satisfied. So the bonus content is something that if you can work it in, instead of skipping a week, put it in your feed in addition, because what's going to happen is we've kind of been talking about specialty episodes to the effect that the assumption that you're going to be putting them in place of an episode. Well, sometimes if you can work these specialty episodes in addition, you are going to satisfy both people that week, because the people who do like to come to your show each week and like to go, hey, let's see what's going on, let's get the usual format, they're going to get that episode. Or the people who love to consume those extra episodes, those break your format episodes, they also get that. So you're really kind of scratching both of those itches if you do end up putting it in your feed in addition to your regular episode that week.
Yeah, and also if you have some sort of, and we've touched upon it before, we don't really go into it because it's in the making money thing, and we're not specializing in that. We're more towards the hobby podcast, trying to get your content and your release in order so that you are better off, have a good leg up on your competition, so to speak. But if you're using something like Patreon or something like that, where you have bonus content available, I know Libsyn, which is a media host, has availability for, you can sell access to special content or whatever. It does cost you more than your normal hosting. You go up to a premium level, and you talk to Libsyn about that, or go to libsyn.com to find out more information on that. But you can actually have bonus content available for your listeners that way. So you can think of everything that we've talked about so far as bonus content to fit that bill as well.
For sure. And the last piece of things that I've got, or advice that I've got, is to be yourself. Just because you're doing an interview that you don't usually do doesn't mean that all of a sudden you want to turn into the National Geographic narrator. On today's episode, we are going to look at the Stargate Pioneer in his wild format. No, you don't need to change yourself. Your audience is coming to check out your podcast because they like you. Whether or not you want to accept that, they like you. There's something that they like about you that they are coming to consume each week. It could be they like to come and argue with you in their mind. That is, they're still liking to do that. They're liking something that you do. So don't go and change your feel because you're doing a specialty episode. Just be yourself.
Be yourself. Absolutely. Have fun. Remember to have fun. It's podcasting. I hope you're having fun with it. You should be. And it's specifically if you're doing a hobby podcast, it is all for fun. So enjoy it and enjoy the different ways that you can produce content.
Absolutely. You got any last things to throw in here before we go on to our download?
If I had a paper wad, I'd throw it at you, but I don't think it would go through the camera.
Save that for the in-person specialty episode that we'll do.
That's going to be fun.
Alrighty.
Welcome to this week's Better Podcasting Download.
Well, this download is not going to apply necessarily to all podcasters. If you do find yourself doing a podcast with people in person, then not so much this episode, but a lot of people don't. A lot of people do podcasts with people who are in other regions. Even if it is people in the same city, a lot of times it's hard to get together. So you do things over Skype or otherwise. And today we're going to talk about something that we've touched on a couple of times. It is bandwidth. We're talking about internet bandwidth because it is a large portion of producing a really decent quality production. Now, even if you do double track, bandwidth is something that you want to consider because, like, let's say that right now we're recording this by Skype, SP and I. If SP was getting from me, it would be really hard for him to follow and there would be no flow. If he couldn't make out what I was saying, how's he going to pick that ball up and roll with it? It's not going to work very well.
No, it's how I have to operate every week, and I can tell you it's not very good at all. All I hear from Steven is, rah, 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 rah. No, seriously, it is. The Gonna Geek 150 episode is a great example. I was getting really crappy quality back, and I had to really stretch to pick up to react to what was going on. And it is a really pain in the butt. So bandwidth is important. Bandwidth is important, especially if you're doing video. It is critical on your ability to actually see what's going on the other end. And I just like to touch upon my bandwidth. I've got broadband cable. It's 30 megs down. It's 5 up. So that 5 up is really the limiter, right? If you're actually producing and streaming content, there's a limited amount of bandwidth, 5 megabits per second, that you can go up. Now, video, that is a lot. HD video is a lot. So I would say a good HD video quality, if you're actually recording on the other end or streaming to like YouTube or whatever, and you want good quality video out, is probably about 2,500. What's the measurement on that? I would usually myself recommend between 1,500 and 2,500 kilobits per second. They're both. What happens is you start to see less artifacts as people move, but 1,500 is a great starting point, and there's a variety of other things that do come into it, but 1,500 to 2,500 is good for the average Joe. So if you are streaming video to multiple places, mind you, and you're streaming audio out through Spreaker or Mixler or something like that, and you are interacting through wherever you're recording, like Skype or Blab or Hangouts on Air or something like that, you have to manage that bandwidth. And right now, my router is not managing it very well. I thought it was a good router when I got it. I don't know if it's firmware. I don't know if it was screwing up or something, but something is preventing me, some QoS, quality of service or whatever in there, is preventing me from prioritizing what I'm supposed to be prioritizing, which is, in this case, Skype. And in other cases, it's Blab, and it gets a bad quality in and out. And while my computer is working fine, my modem is working fine, the router is the issue. So you have to isolate these issues and you have to figure it out, which is what led us to this download, because we're like, okay, we got to talk about this because bandwidth is important.
Absolutely.
And so, Stephen, you want to talk a little bit about the recording end?
Sure. But first, before I do that, I whenever we talk about bandwidth, I always feel obligated to make sure people do understand what we are talking about, which is, SP said, the upload and the download. When you get an internet connection, you usually are offered by your provider a certain amount of download speed and a certain amount of upload speed. And I talked about the term megabits per second. Just to get a little bit techie, megabits per second is different than megabytes per second. So when you look at a file, you usually see it in megabytes. The connection is not megabytes per second. It's actually less. Like, for example, that 30 megabits per second down that SP talked about is actually only 3.75 megabits or megabytes per second. So just to get super techie, I always make sure to give that disclaimer, because a lot of times people start to do calculations based off of file sizes. It doesn't work that way because they are two different measurements. So just a little intro here, I guess, a little preface to the entire segment to make sure that you do understand a little bit better what your provider is offering you. Now, here's the thing that you want to really assess when you are looking at bandwidth is who's doing the recording. Because I'll give you a perfect example of that. I've talked about it before. My internet connection, I don't have that much upload capability out to the internet. And what that means is that as I start to send more stuff out to the internet, like the Skype connection that SP is receiving is going to start to suffer. If all of a sudden I was sending out 6 different video streams when I do a live show, that's going to start to hog that pipe. And thus, when SP is trying to Skype, he's going to run into some problems, maybe those quality problems that he referred to earlier. But wait a minute. I'm the one here that needs to have the good recording, because the way that we work with Better Podcasting is I end up through my computer sending out the video streams to YouTube Live, to Facebook Live, and recording the video. So really, I'm going to prioritize myself, and bottom line, I'm going to go, SP, can you follow the quality that you are getting? If the answer is yes, I don't care about you any further, as long as I am getting clear video and audio, because I'm the one that's going to be having to use this later in the production. So look at it, be realistic. If you people are really limited, if you and your host are limited with the bandwidth that you've got between people, look at who's going to be doing the bulk of the recording and make sure that they do get a clear audio signal. Now, here's the flip side of that coin there. Let's say all of a sudden I lost my track or whatever, and I needed to rely on SP's track. If he's getting bad quality, now what am I stuck with? A bad quality recording.
Yeah, and also if you're depending on your co-host to stream, like in Gonna Geek, I stream Spreaker while Steven streams to YouTube and Facebook Live. On Starling Tribune, Chris streams the video while I stream Spreaker, and it offloads the bandwidth a little bit, and you're able to maintain a higher level of quality throughout the call, throughout the show, throughout the stream. So that is cool. Now, what we've discovered, and this isn't like a eureka moment for Better Podcasting, but Skype scales its bandwidth. So if you are using Skype to go back and forth to record even audio, you got to watch out, because when you first connect, sometimes you hear really digitized sound and really robotic stuff and stuff like that. If you wait 2 minutes, it will scale up and will give you what is constantly able to sustain on the stream. So be prepared to go through that initial stage. So don't like start the call and then start recording right then. If you're bringing on a guest, bring on the guest early and make sure that the guest has time to scale up. That is important to note. And generally, I mean, specifically with Skype, but that's generally true with just about any call over VoIP sort of software out there. Now, Skype has this great little thing that we've discovered. It's a call technical information, and I believe that Steven has something queued up so that we can actually see this. So you can't see any of our names or any of our connections or whatever. That's redacted. But what you can see is the fact, if you look at video capture resolution and video send stream resolution, as well as the receiving resolution down below, you can see that right now we are at 1920 by 1080 in our stream. The video send stream, I believe, is been capped back to me, Steven, at 1280 by 720. Is that true?
Yeah, and just for the audio listener, right now on the YouTube side of things, I'm showing an example of the call technical information screen that you can get through the call menu on Skype, and it essentially just gives you a breakdown of the audio and the video that is being sent over there, and what you want to essentially be aware of, if you are doing a video show, there is a specific couple areas that say res, and if you have a higher quality camera like that Logitech C920, if you're seeing this anything less than 720, that means that somewhere Skype is throttling the connection. But further so, what you can find in there is actually the bit rate as well, which does have some information in there. You've got your if you actually look through the whole menu, what you see on the video side of things is just a small version of it. there is more audio details as well, same sort of thing as what we're showing with the video, but it will tell you a little bit about what is being sent. And if it's looking like it's a lower quality, what's happening is it means that Skype is being throttled along the way. And you're going to be limited with that because, as we mentioned, Skype scales. So just be aware of that.
Yep. Be aware of that. And then be aware of the totality of, we talked about it before, but if you're going to stream to multiple things, do some math in your head and make sure you have sufficient headroom. So whether that's 10%, 20%, whatever it is, make sure you're not using the whole thing, because there will be some process running in the background, somebody driving by your neighborhood that's downloading stuff illegally through your router, or some kids streaming like 10 different screens to Netflix at the same time, or doing FaceTime on their phones or whatever.
Are you talking from personal experience? I feel like you're talking from personal experience.
Yeah, maybe. we'll talk about that later. Anyway. Yeah, it happens where people start to come, like, nobody's home right now, but if somebody happens to come home and they start using the internet, they stream Netflix or whatever, that's going to affect the quality. So that is something that you have to be prepared for. Like, don't go all the way to your bandwidth caps on a regular basis and count on that, unless you're going to shut off your internet to the rest of the house, which, some people actually do that. I actually can do that right here. I can shut off the wireless router and everything will be good here.
Yeah.
But so make sure you do that math in your head. So I have 5 megabytes up. And if I want to, like I said before, if I want to stream to Facebook Live at 2.5 megabytes and YouTube at 2.5 megabits, well, that's 5 right there. And I'm going to have no quality whatsoever to send to my co-hosts over Skype or Blab or whatever it is that I'm recording on. So OBS and I believe XSplit, Wirecast, whatever you're using, they have the ability to constrain the stream that you're throwing back out. And since up is the really constraining factor, I know down kind of is too, but since up really is the constraining factor, make sure that you are adequately giving different areas enough so that they can use what you're giving them while not degrading the entire broadcast. And then in some cases, you're just not going to be able to do it. Like, Steven, you think you could do 3 streams, like YouTube Live and Facebook Live, and then something else, like if Twitter had a streaming, could you do that?
Nope, not at the moment, because Skype is going to hog a large amount of that bandwidth, and unfortunately there's no way within, like, we use Skype, so there's no real way that you can actually go in and tell Skype to use less. It really tries to hog the connection and really scale to the connection that's available, so that causes a variety of problems. The last thing that I want to touch on here with bandwidth is if you are finding that there are problems, and maybe you're going through Hangouts on Air and you're finding that the quality is bad, then you try Skype and you're finding the same thing, and you're going through all these different services and you're getting the same result. Find out, what type of connection am I getting? Because just because your provider tells you you're getting 50 megabits per second down and you're getting 5 up, you might not actually be getting it. Go to a website called speedtest.net. That's my recommendation, speedtest.net. And it will run a test on your connection. And you know what? I have known many people who have done this, and they've been like, hey, I am not getting it, and it's either a problem within your house, or I've actually had a relative who had to call up the provider, and the provider went, you know what, you're right, it's not set properly here. Click, 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 click. There you go, it's fixed. So do that test, and if you're finding you're not getting the speeds, my recommendation would be go and plug yourself in directly to your cable modem or your ADSL modem, whatever it is, and see if it makes a difference. Because if at that point it's not making a difference, then you probably have a problem with your main connection. And it is a very important thing to have, because again, even if you are double ending and you are recording locally on each side, if your partner cannot hear you, it kills the flow. It really does.
It does. Okay, so Steven, I got a great story for you. I don't know if I've ever talked about it with you or not before, but about, I don't know, 5-7 years ago, my son started gaming. He got an Xbox 360 and he's like, oh, I got this Xbox Live and I want to game back and forth. But I had a DSL really slow connection. It was like 3 down and 1 up. And he's like, I can't do this. It's like playing Call of Duty or something. I can't do this. I'm constantly getting killed because my internet speed's so slow. So I called up as a great parent, really. I mean, like, son, I love you so much. I'm going to give you better internet speed because I wasn't podcasting then. Who cared? So I called up my internet provider and I said, I want to go up to the next higher package. I can't remember exactly what it was. It was like 10-3 or something like that. So 15 down, 3 up or whatever it was. So I called and got that and paid for it for like 18 months. Never did a single speedtest.net. At the end of 18 months, my son's like, okay, I can't, I'm just going to sell my Xbox. I can't believe it. I'm like, why? I can't play it. Well, the internet connection should be good enough to play it. It sucks. Have you ever tried it? And back then I didn't have an Xbox 360 and I didn't play on it at all. So I'm like, no. And I watched him do, and I'm like, okay, something's wrong. So I did a speedtest.net for the first time, found out that it was too slow. It was still the 3.1. I called my internet service provider up and I said, guys, what's going on? I'm paying for more than this. What's going on? And there was some router along the way in the connection external to the house that was not set to, it had not been clicked up. And so I've been paying for faster internet speed for like a year and a half and never got it. So I'm like, okay, guys, what you going to do for me? Because you obviously screwed up. And so I had basically had free internet for 9 months. And that was a great 9 months for my son. He's like, I can game finally. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great story because it can absolutely apply to podcasting. And I've known podcasters who have had that happen and they've been like, why am I not getting it? And sure enough, they call up and they get, there's some changes. So do yourself a benefit and make sure if you are finding your connection. And we talked a lot about Skype, and the reason being is because like I'm going to go on record and say that aside from the people that do a live show, I think it's like almost everybody that I know who does podcasting does it via Skype.
Yep. And we need to talk about a side note here because we're talking about bandwidth, but there's also this thing called a data cap. And
yes.
Some people are hard capped. Some people are soft capped. Regardless, if you have an internet service provider, there should be some way that you can log in or call in and find out what your data usage has been for the past few months. If you are doing podcasting, specifically if you are doing video podcasting, odds are your internet usage is up. Why? You're streaming more. You're actually uploading hard files that are larger, like to YouTube or something like that. And so as you go up to HD, it's definitely a consideration. I know people are streaming more and more through Netflix, and there have been talks about who's going to pay for this eventually, because the infrastructure has to be there for you to be able to use this stuff. So some people are going to pay for their data, just like you do on your cell phone usage, right? You're capped at a certain, unless you have one of those grandfathered unlimited plans, you're capped at a certain usage. Yeah, right. Because you're throttled at a certain point anyway. So that sort of stuff can start to happen with your home. So find out how much you're using, find out how much you're supposed to be using as per your plan if you have a cap, and make sure you're underneath that limit or at least close to it. Because I went back a couple months, Steven went back a couple months, and we were both like, so we had to radically restructure a couple of things that we did. So just keep that in mind. It might impact the amount that you have to spend on internet.
Absolutely. And a quick note on that there. Every provider is different. Some providers don't charge extra. They'll just either throttle you or shut you off or tell you that you got to change. Some will charge extra. So be aware of that. And if you start to do a lot of podcasting, and it can be audio only, if you're doing audio only and you're going out live and you're recording at higher quality, you could end up quite quickly going over your package, especially, where what I find is the slower speed packages have a lower bandwidth cap. So if you are in a situation where you're doing audio only and you're like, I just need a smaller internet package, you might go over the monthly allotment, and that's going to be a problem. And I'll share a quick story here before we do wrap up here. As you know, I enjoy doing video, hence Better Podcasting has a video companion. I decided a couple months ago to be like, hey, SP, I know you're having problems with Blab. Why don't I be a host for you for Legends of S.H.I.E.L.D. and I'll use my Skypeosaurus and send you a video file every month and or every week, and I'll end up putting together an XSplit overlay. I'm not going to be able to switch very often, but at least, you know, you've got something that you'll probably like and blah, blah, blah. And so we started to do it. And then, like, literally in the middle of one of his episodes, I decide to log into my internet bill, and I'm like, oh no, I am really over my cap. So we had to shut that down because that's an extra amount of bandwidth that's going out, and I have to send him that file every week. So it just wasn't feasible. So be aware of your caps, because it will really, really not be fun to hobby podcast if it costs you a lot of overage.
Like if you're doing a daily video show, this is going to impact you. It definitely. And if you're using your home internet and instead of work internet, because work internet is a little bit different, you have higher bandwidths, higher data caps and whatever. But as a hobby podcaster, this is one of the many reasons, computer processing as well, that you're just not going to see 4K content out there available for at least a few years until they figure out how to get a bigger stream back and forth to homes, to these service providers.
Absolutely. Well, there you go. There's your Better Podcasting download this week. A little bit off the norm, but it is something that's come up a few different places lately, and not even just on our show either. I've actually seen a few people who still use Blab, and certain people are having problems with it. And the rest of the people participating in the Blab have been fine. So to me, it's chalked up as more of a bandwidth issue. It could be an external thing, but when you have a set of 4 people and only one is cutting in and out, usually that's a pretty good indicator it's a bandwidth problem on that person's end. And so it is something that I do think we should have talked about this week.
Yep. Glad we did.
All right. And before we do close up the show here, let me just go and take a moment here to say we alluded to it. We laid the breadcrumbs out several times this episode. That's right. SP is doing the R&R next week. So you are in luck, because those specialty episodes that we talked about this week we're going to have one of our own. It is going to be a fun little clip show that we've put together so that you do have that next week. And we hope you enjoy it. It's going to look back at some of the earlier Better Podcasting episodes that we did. And I'm going to just go ahead and say right now, my apologies on the lighting. It's terrible on my part.
Yeah, I'll tell you, the first 6 episodes that we did were an arc on preparing your podcast, getting it out the door, just starting your podcast sort of thing. So we thought we'd do a special look into that, because it was topics that are kind of timeless, that you have to revisit every once in a while. And since they weren't too out of date, matter of fact, I don't think they're out of date at all at this point in time, enjoy them, enjoy the banter as Steven and I go back and forth and figure out how to work with each other on a dual show. I mean, it's like we have to like smell each other or something every week. It's almost, like a college dorm room or something like that. So, we got to go through that. And so bear with us and enjoy the 6-episode arc, all condensed down to 1 episode.
That's going to be fun. Alrighty, so for episode number 35 of Better Podcasting, I'm Stephen Jondrew saying Happy Canada Day!
I'm Stargate Pioneer saying, go fun, have some podcasting, and just enjoy life.
Bye!
Thank you for listening to another episode of Better Podcasting. We want to hear from you. You can find all of our contact information at betterpodcasting.com. If you like the show, please consider giving us a 5-star review in iTunes. We encourage you to check out all of the other geeky podcasts available at GonnaGeekNetwork.com. This has been a Gonna Geek production. Thanks for listening, and we will see you again next week.